The Apache girl was to be sold as a slave, until an old Saxon woman claimed her as kin. The stench hit Godgifu like a blow to the chest. Unwashed bodies, rotting fish, and the acrid smoke of charcoal fires choking the winter air of Jorvik's slave market. Her worn boots squelched through the frozen mud as merchants' voices cut through the bitter wind like rusted blades. She pulled her tattered cloak tighter, trying to silence the whispers that had haunted her for years. The memories of her lost granddaughter, taken by Viking raiders when the autumn leaves still burned red. Breathe, she told herself. Pray, forget the old ways. But then she saw her, an impossible sight that made her heart hammer against her ribs. A girl with bronzed skin that had never seen English soil, bound in iron chains among the other wretched souls. The crowd pressed closer as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the marketplace, and Godgifu felt something cold crawl up her spine. This girl, this Apache girl, as the traders called her, shouldn't exist in this place, in this time. The girl's eyes blazed with a fury that Godgifu recognized, the same fire she'd once channeled as a vulva before Christ's cross replaced Odin's ravens in her prayers. But it wasn't the defiance that stopped her breath. It was the marks on the girl's wrists, ancient symbols that pulsed with an energy Godgifu had sworn never to touch again. Runes, the same runes she had carved into her granddaughter's cradle years ago, before Viking steel shattered her world and forced her conversion. The bidding grew frantic. Gold changed hands. And something deep in Godgifu's chest, something she'd buried beneath years of Christian penance, began to burn. E, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo, para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta nos comentários, de qual cidade você está assistindo? Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. Without thinking, without praying, Godgifu pushed through the crowd like a woman possessed. Her voice cracked as she shouted above the auction's din, "Stop! That girl is mine!" The marketplace fell silent as a tomb. Every eye turned toward the weathered Saxon woman, whose reputation as a healer and whispered rumors of her darker past had earned her a grudging respect in Jorvik's shadowed corners. The auctioneer's hammer froze mid-swing. "She is my granddaughter," Godgifu declared, her voice steady now, iron hard. "Stolen years ago, returned to me by God's grace." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some curious, some skeptical. But there was something in her tone, something ancient and unbreakable, that made even the hardest traders step back. Ayana stared at this strange woman with cold, dark eyes, understanding nothing of the Saxon words, but recognizing something primal in her gaze, something that spoke in a language older than speech. The runes on her wrists began to tingle, responding to a power she couldn't name. Godgifu extended her hand toward the girl, and for the first time in years, She felt the old magic stirring beneath her skin like serpents waking from winter sleep. But as her fingers neared the glowing marks on Ayana's wrists, the girl jerked back with a cry that echoed strangely through the market square. The sound didn't just fill the air, it seemed to make the very earth tremble. Merchants shifted nervously. Dogs whined, and Godgifu noticed several hooded figures in the shadows, beginning to move toward them. Their faces hidden, but their intent clear as polished steel. The auctionee, if you can prove your claim, woman. But before Godgifu could respond, a voice like distant thunder rolled across the marketplace. Deep, familiar, and heavy with menace. Godgifu of the ancient runes. It has been far too long since we last met. She turned slowly, ice flooding her veins. She knew that voice before she saw the face. Knew that her desperate, impossible decision had just awakened forces she had spent years trying to escape. The man who stepped from the shadows wore a trader's robes, but his eyes held the cold fire of something far older. Something that remembered when she carved runes instead of crosses, when she spoke with spirits instead of saints. "Did you really think," he continued, his smile sharp as a sacrificial blade, "that we wouldn't notice when you touched the old magic again? When you tried to claim what belongs to us?" Ayana's chains clinked as she pressed against the auction block, her instincts screaming danger in a language that transcended words. The runes on her wrists flared brighter, and somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered a name that made the blood drain from Godgifu's face. Loki's children. The ancient enemy. The reason she'd abandoned her power. The reason she'd let Christ's light burn away the darkness she'd once commanded. And now they had found her again. The hooded figure stepped closer, and Godgifu's world shattered like ice beneath a warhammer. She knew that scarred jaw, those pale eyes that had haunted her nightmares for 15 winters. The same face she'd watched disappear beneath the black waters of the fjord, dragged down by the weight of his own chainmail as her granddaughter's screams echoed across the burning village. Impossible. "Hello, Mother," Ragnar said, his voice a whisper of grave dirt and broken promises. "Did you miss me?" The marketplace seemed to tilt sideways. Merchants backed away, as if death itself had walked among them. And perhaps it had. Godgifu's son, her firstborn, the raider she'd helped the Christians drown when she discovered he'd been selling Saxon children to the flesh markets of the north. "You died," she breathed, her voice cracking like kindling. "I watched you die." ... Ragnar's laugh was winter wind through a charnel house. "Oh, I did die, Mother. The fish picked my bones clean on the sea floor. But Loki's children, they have uses for the drowned. They raised me from the depths with a purpose." His eyes shifted to Ayana, who pressed herself against the auction block as the runes on her wrists blazed like captured starlight. "And what a purpose it is. Do you know what you've done by touching the old magic again? By claiming her?" The Apache girl suddenly cried out, not in fear, but in a language that made the very stones of Jorvik hum with power. Ancient words that predated Christ, predated even the Norse gods. Words that spoke of prophecy and blood debt. Godgifu's legs nearly buckled. She understood those words, had heard them whispered in dreams that weren't dreams, in visions that had driven her to Christ's arms in desperate flight from her own gifts. The word song, the prophecy of the last vulva, backing away from both her undead son and the girl whose chains were beginning to crack and steam. Not her. Anyone but her. "Oh yes, mother." Ragnar's grin revealed teeth like broken glass. "Your precious granddaughter, your real granddaughter, grows strong in our halls beneath the waves. She calls for you every night, begging for the grandmother who let her be taken. But she is not the one foretold." The chains around Iana's wrists exploded into molten fragments. The girl rose from the auction block like a dark goddess awakening, her skin crackling with runic power that turned the winter air to summer heat. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that shouldn't exist in any human throat. "I am the Wound Walker. I am the Doom Daughter. I am the one who will remake the 9 worlds in fire and shadow." The market erupted into chaos. Merchants scattered like leaves before a hurricane, but Godgifu stood frozen, understanding with horrible clarity what she had done. In trying to save one lost soul, she had awakened the destroyer of worlds, the girl who would bring about Ragnarok, and her undead son, Loki's most faithful servant, had orchestrated it all. "The Norns spin strangely, don't they, mother?" Ragnar whispered, as reality began to bend around the blazing Apache girl. One moment of compassion, one touch of forbidden magic, and the ending of all things begins. Ayana turned toward Godgifu with eyes like dying stars and smiled. The words of power died on Ayana's lips as her blazing eyes fixed on something beyond Godgifu's shoulder. The Apache girl's face, moments before terrible with divine fury, crumpled into an expression of pure, childlike terror. "Nalnish," she whispered in her native tongue, the word barely audible above the marketplace chaos. "No, not you." Godgifu spun around, following the girl's horrified gaze. Through the scattering crowd walked a figure that made her blood turn to winter slush. An elderly Apache man, his weathered face marked with ritual scars, his eyes holding the cold satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. Ayana collapsed to her knees, the runic fire guttering out like candles in a hurricane. The chains that had exploded with divine power reformed around her wrists, heavier than before. The girl who moments ago had proclaimed herself the destroyer of worlds now trembled like a frightened child. "Grandfather," she breathed in Saxon, the word thick with shame and terror. The old Apache warrior stepped forward, ignoring the supernatural chaos around him, as if undead Vikings were merely another day's annoyance. When he spoke, his English was heavily accented, but precise as a blade between ribs. "Ayana, who speaks with stones, you thought the great waters would hide you from justice?" His scarred hands moved in ritual gestures that made the air itself seem to recoil. "You thought your stolen magic would protect you from the consequences of what you did to our people?" Godgifu's mind reeled. What is he talking about? Ragnar laughed, the sound like breaking ice. "Oh, mother, did you think we chose her randomly? Your precious granddaughter is no innocent victim." The Apache elder's eyes never left Ayana's face as he spoke. "She murdered 17 children of our tribe. fed their souls to the shadow spirits to gain power. When our warriors came for her, she fled through the spirit paths and landed in your world. Liar! Iona snarled, but her denial rang hollow. The runes on her wrists, instead of blazing with righteous power, now pulsed with something darker. Hungrier. The children's bones still cry out for justice, her grandfather continued. Their mothers still wake screaming. And you, his gaze shifted to Godgifu with something like pity. You touched her with the old magic. You claimed kinship with a soul eater. Do you understand what that makes you? The truth hit Godgifu like an axe to the chest. In Norse law, in the ancient laws that still governed the vulva's power, claiming kin with a child murderer made her complicit in the crime. By touching Iona with magic, by declaring her granddaughter, she had bound their fates together. The word song was never about her bringing Ragnarok, Ragnar whispered with delicious malice. It was about her corruption spreading to you. The last true vulva, turned into something monstrous by an act of misplaced compassion. Godgifu felt it then, the change creeping through her blood like poison. The magic she'd touched to save this girl was transforming, becoming the same shadow hunger that had driven Iona to murder. She could feel it whispering, "Take their life force, drain them dry, feed the endless darkness inside." "No," she gasped, but her hands were already moving in patterns she didn't remember learning. Dark runes, hungry runes. The Apache elder raised a bundle of burning sage, its smoke cutting through the supernatural miasma like sunlight through storm clouds. The shadow walker must die, and so must any who share her corruption. Iona looked up at Godgifu with eyes that held no trace of the divine destroyer. Only a terrified girl who had made unforgivable choices. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them take me back. You don't know what they'll do." But Godgifu barely heard her. The hunger was growing stronger, and she could see the life threads of everyone in the marketplace, glowing like golden rope, just waiting to be severed and consumed. Her son's laughter echoed across the square as her grandfather's spirit fire began to spread. And somewhere in the shadows, something ancient stirred, something that had been waiting for this moment since the first rune was carved. The sage smoke hit Godgifu's hunger-twisted vision like a physical blow, and through the sudden clarity, she saw something that made her heart stop beating entirely. The Apache elder's ritual scars, those precise, deliberate marks carved into weathered flesh. She knew those scars, had traced them with trembling fingers in the darkness of a winter lodge 15 years ago, when she'd still been married to a Saxon trader who spoke of distant lands beyond the great waters. Before the Vikings came. Before everything burned. "Esta," she whispered in the Apache tongue, she'd learned in secret, in stolen moments of forbidden love. "My firekeeper." The old warrior's burning sage tumbled from suddenly nerveless fingers. His scarred face went white as fresh snow, eyes widening in recognition that transcended years and oceans, and the weight of unforgivable betrayal. Godgifu? The name fell from his lips like a prayer to dead gods. My woman who walks in storms? The marketplace spun around her. This wasn't just Iona's grandfather. This was her Esta, the Apache warrior who had loved her with quiet intensity while her Saxon husband traded furs and amber in the distant territories. The man whose child she had carried in secret, a daughter with bronze skin and cold dark eyes. A daughter she had abandoned when the Viking raiders came, choosing to save her Saxon-born granddaughter instead. "Where is she?" Ishtashe's voice cracked like breaking stone. "Where is Siala?" "Our daughter?" The words hit Godgifu like arrows finding their mark. She saw understanding dawn in his eyes as she failed to answer. Saw love transform into something harder and more terrible than hatred. "You left her," he breathed. "When death came to your people, you saved the Saxon child and left our daughter to burn." Ayana looked between them with growing horror. "Grandmother, you knew my grandfather? You—" Her voice broke as the truth crystallized. "You had a daughter with him. A daughter who was my aunt." "Your aunt who I murdered," Ayana whispered, the confession torn from her throat. "Siala was the first soul I fed to the shadow spirits. She tried to stop me from killing the other children, tried to protect them." Tears carved tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "I ate her life force, while she begged me to remember the stories she used to tell." The silence that followed could have cracked mountains. Ishtashe's weathered hands moved to the bone knife at his belt, the same blade Godgifu remembered him using to carve their love promises into birch bark. His eyes held the cold fire of a man who had lost everything twice over. "So," he said with terrible gentleness, "the woman I loved abandoned our daughter to die, and that daughter's own bloodkin murdered her for power." His gaze shifted between Godgifu and Ayana like a predator choosing between prey. The spirits sing of such perfect justice. Ragnar's delighted laughter echoed across the square. "Oh, this is even better than we planned. The child eater who killed her own aunt. The grandmother who abandoned her mixed-blood daughter to save a pure Saxon. And the lover whose heart you shattered twice, once with abandonment, once with the truth of what abandonment bred." But Ashtashe wasn't listening to the undead Viking. His attention had fixed on something else. The way the shadow hunger in Godgifu's eyes was growing stronger, fed by guilt and self-hatred and the terrible magic she'd used to claim Ayana. "You're becoming like her," he said with dawning horror. "The corruption is spreading." Godgifu felt it too. The whispers in her blood were getting louder, demanding she drain the life from everyone in the marketplace, demanding she feed the endless void that Ayana's magic had awakened inside her soul. And somewhere in the growing darkness of her mind, she realized that this had always been the plan, that Ayana hadn't fled to this world by accident. She had been summoned here by someone who knew exactly what would happen when a guilt-ridden vulva tried to save the girl who had murdered her abandoned daughter. Someone who wanted to create a soul eater powerful enough to devour the 9 worlds. Ishtashe raised his bone knife as shadow fire began to pour from Godgifu's fingertips, and in the distance, something vast and hungry stirred in the spaces between realms. The bone knife trembled in Ishtashe's weathered grip as he raised it toward the woman he had once carved love promises for. But before the blade could find its mark, the air itself screamed, a sound like reality tearing, like the roots of Yggdrasil being ripped from the earth. Everyone in the marketplace, living, dead, and damned, froze as something vast pressed against the boundaries of the world. The shadow fire pouring from Godgifu's fingertips suddenly reversed course, flowing into her instead of out, and her scream of agony harmonized with that cosmic shriek in a way that made stones crack and birds fall dead from the sky. "No," Ragnar whispered, his undead confidence cracking like ice. "This isn't how it was supposed to." The words died in his throat as a figure stepped through the tear in reality. Not walked, stepped, as if the world was merely another room in an endless hall. Godgifu's heart stopped completely. It was Ciala, her abandoned daughter, but wrong. Impossibly wrong. The girl's bronze skin held the blue-white pallor of ancient ice. Her cold, dark eyes blazed with the cold fire of dying stars. And carved into her flesh, covering every inch from scalp to soul, were runes that predated Norse, predated Saxon, predated every written language that had ever existed. The original runes, the first words of power, spoken when the universe was young. "Hello, Mother," Ciala said, her voice carrying harmonics that made reality shiver. "Did you think death would keep me from collecting what you owe? ... Ayana collapsed completely, her face pressed into the frozen mud. "Aunt Ciala, but I killed you! I ate your soul! You can't be—" "Oh, little blood betrayer." Ciala's attention shifted to her niece with something far worse than hatred. Something like amusement. "You ate my flesh soul, yes, but you never understood what I truly was, did you?" The Apache elder, backing away, his scarred face twisted with horror beyond comprehension. "Diyin. She's Diyin. The holy people. They took her spirit when she died." "Not took," Ciala corrected gently. "Welcomed home." Her impossible gaze swept across the marketplace, past her terrified father, past her cowering niece, past the undead son who had thought himself the architect of apocalypse, and settled on Godgifu with the weight of cosmic judgment. "I am the eldest daughter of the Spider Grandmother, the first child born when your European gods were still muling things, learning to crawl. And you," her smile could have frozen the sun, "you abandoned me to die so that I could become what I always was meant to be." Godgifu's legs buckled. The corruption in her blood wasn't spreading anymore. It was being drawn out of her, pulled into her daughter like iron filings to a lodestone. "Ciala, I'm sorry, Sorry?" The word echoed strangely, as if spoken in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Mother, I'm not here for apologies." She gestured to the chaos around them. The undead Viking, the soul-eating Apache girl, the broken warrior with his bone knife, the vulva drowning in stolen darkness. "I'm here because this beautiful orchestration of pain and betrayal has finally given me enough spiritual energy to attempt something I've been planning for 15 years. The runes carved into her flesh began to pulse in sequence, each one blazing brighter than the last. Reality bent around her like heated metal, and through the growing distortion, shapes began to appear. Vast shapes, ancient and patient, and hungry. "I'm going to use the life force of every person in this world, every soul from the fjords to the deserts to the lands beyond the great waters, to fuel a spell that will rewrite the very foundations of existence. Her eyes met Godgifu's, and for just a moment, there was something almost like love in that cosmic gaze. "And when I'm done, Mother, when I've remade everything according to my will, I'll bring you back so you can watch me do it all over again, for eternity." The shapes behind her were becoming clearer now. Gods, not the familiar Aesir or the gentle Christ, but things from the spaces between mythologies. Things that had been waiting in the dark spaces of belief since the first human looked up at the stars and felt afraid. Esta's bone knife slipped from nerveless fingers as his daughter's true nature revealed itself, and somewhere in the distance, every bell in Jorvik, the bells of Jorvik, tolled like funeral drums, but their bronze voices carried something wrong. A harmony that belonged to no Christian bellmaker's craft. As the cosmic entities pressed closer to reality's tattered edges, Godgifu noticed something that made her blood freeze in her veins. The bell tower. The Christian bell tower, where she had prayed every morning for 15 years, seeking forgiveness for her abandoned daughter. Carved into its stone foundations, glowing now with the same impossible light as Siala's flesh runes, were symbols that predated Christ by eons. The same symbols, the identical markings that covered her divine daughter from head to toe. "No," she whispered, understanding crashing over her like a tide of liquid iron. The church, the conversion, it was never real. Siala's laughter was the sound of stars burning out. "Oh, Mother, did you think your guilt-driven prayers went unanswered? Did you believe some gentle Nazarene carpenter heard your midnight confessions?" The bronze bells sang louder, their impossible harmonies making the very air shimmer. Through that shimmer, Godgifu saw the truth that had been hidden for 15 years of faithful worship. The priest who had converted her, Father Aldrich, with his gentle eyes and reassuring words about forgiveness. She could see him now in her memories, but the disguise was falling away like shed skin. The same cold dark eyes, the same ancient patience, the same terrible love. "You," she breathed, "you were the priest. You've been watching me pray to you every morning." 15 years of beautiful agony, Siala confirmed with divine satisfaction. 15 years of watching you beg forgiveness from the daughter you abandoned. Every prayer fed my power. Every tear of guilt made me stronger. Ishtashe staggered backwards, his scarred face twisted with horror that transcended human understanding. "The holy people don't. We don't." But the words died in his throat. Because this thing wearing his daughter's face wasn't following any mythology he recognized. The conversion of Jorvik wasn't about Christ's victory over the old gods, Siala continued, gesturing to the glowing church tower. It was about preparing a massive spiritual anchor in this world, a place where enough human faith could gather to fuel something unprecedented. Ragnar, who had orchestrated the elaborate scheme to corrupt his mother, now cowered like a child as he realized the truth. We weren't working for Loki's children. We were working for her the whole time. Every scheme, every betrayal. every perfectly crafted moment of suffering. Ciala's attention swept across the gathered players, like a goddess reviewing her pieces on some cosmic game board. Ayana's murders gave me death energy. Her corruption of mother gave me guilt energy. The undead son provided hate energy. And 15 years of misdirected Christian prayer? The church bells reached a crescendo that made reality itself ring like struck metal. That gave me enough faith energy to attempt something no deity has ever tried. I'm going to use this entire world, every living soul, every grain of earth, every drop of water, as raw material to create a new pantheon of gods, with myself as their eternal queen. The cosmic entities behind her weren't ancient gods at all. God Gifu realized with dawning terror. They were potential gods, blank divine templates waiting to be filled with the raw essence of an entire world's destruction and rebirth. But as Ciala raised her rune-carved hands to begin the reality-remaking spell, something impossible happened. Ayana began to laugh, the broken sobbing of a terrified child, but laughter rich with dark amusement and something else, something that made even a divine being pause in confusion. "Ciala," the Apache girl said, rising from the mud with movements too fluid for human joints. "Did you never wonder why the shadow spirits taught me to eat souls? Why they chose a child from our tribe to corrupt?" Her eyes, when she lifted them, weren't human anymore. They held depths that spoke of spaces between the stars, of hungers that preceded creation itself. "I'm not your niece." The words dropped into the supernatural chaos like stones into still water, creating ripples of impossibility that made even Ciala's cosmic confidence flicker. "I'm the thing that ate her." The marketplace held its breath as reality warped around the thing wearing Ayana's face. The bronze bells of Jorvik fell silent, their cosmic song cut short as if even divine harmonies recoiled from this new revelation. Ciala, goddess, daughter, architect of apocalypse, took an involuntary step backward. For the first time in 15 years of patient orchestration, uncertainty flickered across her cosmic features. "Impossible," she whispered, but the word carried less conviction than fear. I felt Ayana's life force. I tasted her corruption when she murdered. "When she murdered your flesh body?" The thing laughed again, stretching Ayana's stolen skin like an ill-fitting garment. "Oh, sweet summer goddess, you felt exactly what I wanted you to feel." The air around the creature began to shimmer with a darkness that hurt to perceive directly. Not shadow, but the absence of light, as if reality itself was being slowly digested. When it spoke again, its voice carried harmonics that made Ciala's cosmic tones sound like a child's whisper. "I am what crawled up from the spaces beneath the void when the first star died. What your mythologies couldn't conceive because mortal minds break trying to understand my nature." The thing wearing Ayana's face smiled with too many teeth. "Your people call me the eater of stories, the one who devours entire mythologies and wears them like discarded clothing." God Gifu's legs gave out completely as the truth bloomed like poison in her mind. The Christian conversion that wasn't Christian. Ciala's divine ascension. Ragnar's resurrection. Ayana's soul-eating rampage. every supernatural event of the past 15 years. None of it had been real. "You've been feeding on us," she breathed. "All of us. Every god we thought we were serving, every power we believed in. You've been eating our faith and wearing our stories like masks." The creature's grin widened impossibly. The Norse believed in Loki's children. I became their tempter god and fed on their chaos worship. The Christians prayed for salvation. I wore their savior's face and drank their hope. The Apache honored their holy people. I devoured their spiritual reverence from the inside. Esta clutched his chest as if his heart was tearing in half. "Siala, my daughter, is she even dead and consumed long ago, little firekeeper?" "Along with your gods, your ancestors, and every story your people ever told to explain the darkness." The thing's attention shifted back to the entity it had been addressing as Siala. "And you, my dear daughter goddess, do you begin to understand what you actually are?" The divine being who had orchestrated 15 years of elaborate revenge began to flicker like candlelight in wind. Her cosmic awareness, her reality-bending power, her army of potential gods, all of it wavering as if it had never been more than illusion. Siala's voice cracked like breaking ice. "I'm another story you're eating. The most delicious one yet," the creature confirmed with maternal fondness. "A daughter's perfect revenge against the mother who abandoned her. Fed by genuine guilt, seasoned with authentic divine power, garnished with the despair of everyone who loved you." It turned toward the crowd of frozen mortals, and witnessed by an audience whose faith in any form of justice I can now consume completely. God Gifu felt something vital draining from her soul as the last vestiges of hope crumbled. If even her daughter's terrible divinity was nothing more than this thing's elaborate meal, then what did that make her desperate quest for redemption? What did it make any of their struggles against fate and cruelty and loss? Food, the eater of stories, answered her unspoken question with delighted malice. All of it, every prayer, every quest, every moment of love or sacrifice or transcendence. Seasoning for the only feast that matters. The cosmic entities pressing against reality's borders began to dissolve like morning mist, revealed as nothing more than projections of appetite. But something else was taking their place in the spaces between worlds. Something vast and patient and so fundamentally hungry that its mere presence made existence feel thin and temporary. "And now," the creature said, beginning to shed Ayana's form like a snake discarding skin, "it's time for the main course." The true horror behind every story they'd ever believed began to reveal itself, and Godgifu realized with dawning terror that the apocalypse wasn't coming. It had been digesting them all along. But as the thing's stolen flesh began to ripple and tear, revealing glimpses of the cosmic horror beneath, Godgifu felt something impossible stir in her chest. Not despair, not the hollow emptiness of consumed faith. Laughter. The sound bubbled up from somewhere deeper than her soul, richer and more ancient than any power she'd ever touched. Around her, the frozen marketplace began to shift, not dissolving like the false visions, but solidifying, becoming more real, more vivid, as if everything before this moment had been the dream. "Oh, you hungry little parasite," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the eater of stories pause mid-transformation. "Did you really think you could devour everything?" The creature's borrowed face twisted with confusion and the first flicker of genuine fear. "Impossible. I consumed your faith, your hope, my performance," Godgifu interrupted, rising to her feet with fluid grace that belonged to no mortal woman. 15 years of the most elaborate acting the 9 worlds have ever seen. The bronze bells of Jorvik began tolling again, but their song was different now, older, wilder, carrying the howl of winter wolves and the crash of storm waves against stone cliffs. The Church of Christ flickered like dying embers, revealing beneath it a structure of bone and amber and cold iron that predated every human settlement. A real temple. A place of power that had been hidden beneath layers of careful illusion. "You see, little story eater," Godgifu continued, her weathered face beginning to shed its mortal disguise. "There's one mythology you never encountered before coming to this world. One that you couldn't prepare for." Esta backed away as the woman he'd loved revealed features that belonged on no human face. Eyes like winter starlight, skin that held the pale perfection of fresh snow, hair that moved like silver flame in an unfelt wind. "The Norns," she whispered, and the word hit the marketplace like a physical blow. "The fates themselves, the weavers of weird who determine the destiny of gods and mortals alike." Her smile could have frozen the heart of the sun. "Did you think we wouldn't notice a cosmic parasite trying to eat our carefully crafted stories?" The creature wearing Ayana's dissolving flesh let out a shriek that shattered every piece of glass in Jorvik. "The Norns are myth, part of the Norse pantheon I devoured centuries ago. The Norse interpretation of us, perhaps." Godgifu's true form began to emerge fully, not the ancient Saxon healer, not even the fallen vulva, but something vast and patient and utterly terrifying in its cosmic authority. "But we are older than their gods, older than your hunger. We wrote the first stories, little parasite. We don't just weave fate. We are the concept of narrative itself." Around them, other figures began shedding their disguises. Ishtashe's scarred features melted away, revealing a face carved from living shadow and starfire. Ragnar's undead flesh cracked open like an eggshell, showing something beneath that hurt to look at directly. Even the cowering merchants and traders began to shimmer and change. Every person you thought you were feeding from, the revealed Norn continued with terrible gentleness. Every god you believed you'd consumed, every story you imagined you'd digested, all of it was bait in the most elaborate trap we've ever woven. The thing that had worn so many faces, eaten so many mythologies, devoured entire pantheons of belief, suddenly looked very small and very alone in a marketplace full of cosmic forces that had been hunting it across multiple realities. "Welcome to the end of your story, eater of stories. We've been writing your finale for eons." But as the Norns closed in for what should have been the ultimate triumph, "Oh, finally," it whispered, and began to smile. "I was wondering when you'd drop the pretense." The creature's relief should have been the first warning. But the Norns, drunk on their own cosmic authority, pressed forward like wolves scenting wounded prey. Your hunger ends here, the being that had been Godgifu declared, weaving patterns in the air that could unmake galaxies. We've spent millennia perfecting this trap. The eater of stories began to laugh, not the broken sound of defeat, but rich amusement that made the ancient temple stones crack. Oh, my dear daughters, did you never wonder why I led you such a merry chase across the realms? The shadows cast by the Norns flickered strangely, as if reality itself was having second thoughts. Why I always left just enough evidence for you to follow. Why I made myself so findable when I'd successfully hidden from cosmic forces far older than your kind. The thing wearing Ayana's dissolving face began to shed that disguise completely, but what lay beneath wasn't the cosmic horror they'd expected. It was something far worse. Familiarity. Features that belonged on no single face, but that the Norns recognized with dawning terror. An eye that held Godgifu's winter starlight. Eishtashay's ritual scars flowing across cheekbones that belonged to Ragnar. A smile carved from Siala's divine authority. No, breathed the Norn who had played the Saxon healer. You're not eating our stories. You're fourth sister, the creature confirmed with terrible gentleness. Skuld, the Norn of what must come to pass. The sister you murdered at the dawn of creation because my prophecies were too dark for even your tastes. The cosmic winds howling through Jorvik fell silent as the truth hit like a physical blow. The Norns hadn't been hunting a foreign parasite across multiple realities. They'd been running from their own guilt. But dead Norns don't stay dead, Skuld continued, her borrowed features shifting like water. We just change, become something hungrier, something that feeds on the very concept of story, instead of merely weaving it. The temple of bone and amber began to crumble as the remaining Norn's power wavered. 15 years of elaborate theater, centuries of cosmic pursuit, all of it orchestrated by the sister they'd betrayed, the fourth weaver of fate who'd been digesting their carefully crafted narratives from the inside. Every myth I devoured, every pantheon I consumed. I was gathering power for this moment, when all three of my murderous sisters would willingly trap themselves in a single location, convinced of their own cleverness. The air around Skuld began to thicken with something worse than darkness, with the weight of endings themselves. The final threads of every story ever told, all converging on this moment. The Apache called me the Eater of Stories, because they understood what you refused to see. I don't just weave what must come to pass. Her smile held the cold satisfaction of prophecy finally fulfilled. I am what comes to pass, the ending that devours the beginning, the conclusion that makes everything that came before meaningless. But as the three Norns began to dissolve under the weight of their sister's terminal authority, Skuld made one final revelation that froze their cosmic essence in mid-dispersal. And the most beautiful part, this isn't revenge, sisters. This is mercy. Her voice carried harmonics of genuine love, twisted by eons of betrayal into something unrecognizable. Because once I've consumed your power completely, I'll have enough strength to do what you never had the courage to attempt. I'll unwrite the very concept of suffering, delete pain from the fundamental structure of existence itself. The temple shuddered as reality began to comprehend the true scope of her intention. Every tragedy, every loss, every moment of injustice across all possible worlds, I'll reach back through the threads of causality and unmake them at their source. Around them, the marketplace of Jorvik began to blur and shift, revealing glimpses of other times, other places where suffering was being carefully catalogued and prepared for erasure. No more orphan children, no more abandoned daughters, no more broken hearts or shattered dreams or prayers that go unanswered. Her eyes blazed with the terrible compassion of absolute ending. I'm going to murder the very possibility of unhappiness, and you're going to help me do it. But as Skuld reached for her sister's fading essence, something impossible happened. They began to smile. The three Norn smiles held no fear, no defeat, only the terrible satisfaction of sisters who had orchestrated their own destruction with surgical precision. "Oh, Skuld," whispered the one who had been God Gifu, her fading essence crackling with dark amusement. "Did you think we spent 15 years weaving this elaborate trap just to be caught in it ourselves?" Around them, the crumbling temple began to shift once more, revealing its true nature, not bone and amber, but something far more fundamental. The loom itself, the cosmic framework where all stories were woven, where fate itself was spun from the raw threads of possibility. "We've been dying for millennia," the Shadow Norn who had played Esta confirmed with gentle finality, growing weaker with each world that rejected the concept of inescapable destiny. "But you've been growing stronger by consuming every story you touch." Skuld's terrible compassion flickered with uncertainty as understanding began to dawn. "You're not trying to escape. You're trying to feed ourselves to you willingly," the third sister completed with loving cruelty. "Because the only way to stop the eater of stories from unmaking suffering itself is to give her something more powerful to digest." The marketplace of Jorvik dissolved entirely, revealing the truth beneath all illusions. Three ancient beings pouring their cosmic essence into their sister's terminal hunger. But instead of being consumed, that power was changing her, completing her. "We are the fourth Norn," they said in unison, their individual voices harmonizing into something that never existed before. Past, present, future, and choice. The sister we pretended to murder because the universe needed to believe fate was absolute. Skuld's borrowed flesh cracked open like an eggshell as the truth rewrote her very existence. She wasn't the fourth sister. She was the fourth aspect of a single cosmic entity, the part that had been hidden away, growing strong in exile, learning to devour stories, so that she could eventually devour the need for stories entirely. The power flooding into her carried not just her sister's essence, but their final gift, the understanding that unmaking suffering meant unmaking growth, that deleting pain would delete the very concept of overcoming, of learning, of becoming more than what you were born to be. "Choose," her reconstructed self whispered, as divine awareness flooded through her reunited consciousness. Save them from all pain and watch them become hollow echoes of themselves. Or let the stories continue, with all their cruelty and all their beauty. Around her, the cosmic loom hummed with infinite possibility. Every thread represented a life, a choice, a moment where suffering could transform into wisdom or break someone entirely. She could see it all, past and future, and the endless branching possibilities between them. In one thread, a Saxon woman mourned her abandoned daughter, but learned compassion deep enough to save a stranger. In another, an Apache warrior discovered that even the deepest betrayal couldn't kill love. A third showed an undead son whose hatred ultimately taught his mother the true weight of forgiveness. Every story built on pain. Every triumph born from loss. Every moment of transcendence purchased with the currency of tears. Skuld, now truly the complete Norn of choice, reached out with fingers that held the power to rewrite existence itself, and chose to let the stories continue. The cosmic loom shimmered once, like sunlight on water, and then faded into the gentle morning light of Jorvik's marketplace. No gods, no magic, no supernatural horrors wearing stolen flesh. Just an old Saxon woman, kneeling in the mud beside a frightened Apache girl, whispering words of comfort in a language that transcended culture and time. Just an elderly warrior, watching his granddaughter find kindness in a world that had shown her precious little. Just a community learning that sometimes the greatest magic is simply choosing to help when help is needed. The stories would continue, with all their pain, with all their beauty, and somewhere in the space between one heartbeat and the next, 4 sisters smiled and returned to their eternal work of weaving fate from the choices mortals made when they thought no one was watching. Se esta saga tocou sua alma, então escute o chamado do Skald. A nossa jornada depende da força do nosso clã, e essa força é você. Você precisa se inscrever agora, para que os deuses do algoritmo não te façam perder nossas próximas lendas exclusivas. Este é o momento de mostrar seu valor. Esmague o botão de like para alimentar nossa fogueira e inunde os comentários com suas reações sobre este final. Suas teorias são o ouro do nosso tesouro. E o mais importante, compartilhe instantaneamente este vídeo com pelo menos 5 amigos que precisam conhecer este desfecho. Apenas os verdadeiros guerreiros do nosso clã entendem a importância destas ações. Não espere nem mais um segundo.